Ugh. It's really long. Of millions, I often ask myself for my identity. I strive to seek it. In a way, I'm always trying to separate myself from the others, to rise from the masses and become something of my own. So join me on my journey as I intend to reach across the stars and to find myself, to go through pages and pages of other people's journeys to find my passions and to find myself. But who am I, you may ask? I am the Wordman. So hey people, and welcome to edit this part. So I finally finished The Walking Dead. Now guys, I think this will be my first review, which is gonna be not, let's just say, positive, to say the least. It's not gonna be like completely negative, or it's gonna be completely positive. It'll always coast in the middle somewhere, because that's what I feel about this series, because it's so overly long, and even though the TV show is popular and everything. So if you don't know what this is about, which I don't know how, like, if you don't know what Walking Dead is about, and you don't know anything about pop culture and like anything, so this is basically about Rick Grimes, and well, it's set in a world where the zombie apocalypse happens, and what happens is that the zombie apocalypse happens, and then and Rick Grimes, who was a cop before the apocalypse, wakes up from a coma, and the world is full of zombies. So he survives, and then he meets his kid and his wife, and this is basically his story through the apocalypse, and it's really that, like, it's basically that, about horror and how humanity might be worse than the monsters that these are. So let's start off with what I think is the positive aspects of this, and I think the positive aspects of this is the story's engaging points. So like, there are stories and arcs in here where like you're sometimes bored, but when it gets going, you're like engaged, like Negan or the governor or many of these villains that we'll talk about later. All of these characters are interesting, and they're engaging, to say the least. Like, to say the least, that would be the least thing to say. But yeah, so all these characters that we see uh, are kind of in one way, and these stories are done in a way where you're, at moments, you're just kind of go boom, boom, boom. I can't stop reading. I can't stop reading, and it won't be stopped. I think another good thing about the story is the world building, because if you don't know how the zombie apocalypse happens, like, it's never told to us, not even once, how the zombie apocalypse happens, but it just happens. And I think the world building after that is interesting, because civilization has fallen, right? Like, if apocalypse that happens in the real world, everything's gone, like everything's fucked, and nobody's gonna have anything, and it's just gonna be completely utterly destroyed, to the point where can we get it back? And that's really engaging here, where you feel like it's kind of like a zombie western, to say the least, if that's a real genre. But that's what this feels like, where all these characters and all this world is just really nicely built, where over the course of the series you start to see that how civilization has changed and what they're doing. I think another great thing about the series is the realism, I think, in it, I would say, guess, where it's not over the top or ridiculous. It's really realistic to and gritty, where what would happen. So I think that, on the top of my head, that's like the most positive that I think this series has, because I think there's a lot more negative, and the most biggest negative for me for this series is it's so long. Like, it's like so long. It's like 200 issues, and it's ran for 16 years. That's insanity. 16 years. That's a long, long time for a story to be out there. And I haven't watched the TV show, and I've heard the TV show, as it goes on, is not that good, and it's not that popular anymore, and it just ended with 10 seasons, and I haven't watched that. But reading this, I can see why people don't like it, because it's so stretched. It's like Breaking Bad, if you ever seen Breaking Bad. That Breaking Bad starts and ends at a perfect point, but imagine if Bad was just stretched, and there were like 300 million enemies for Walter White to fight and Jesse Pinkman and all these things. It feels like that you're so long to the point where it's like you need to end this. Like, and here's where I come back to the villains. Most of these villains are basically the same. Like, I'm not gonna lie, the Commonwealth leader, Governor Negan, most of all these and even others that are not coming to my mind. All of these are like these people who like wear zombies skin as like their own, like I don't know, like I don't know what they're called. I forgot what they're called, but basically they're the same. Like, there are moments when you're gonna be like, wait, isn't that the same thing? Like, isn't that the same villain? I think the most interesting villain is Negan, because Negan is the most weirdest, ziniest one with this different philosophy. And I think that's my issue with this story, whereas that there's so many unnecessary villains in this, but they're basically different forms of the same thing about this person who after the apocalypse faced horrible things and became a monster. And that's where it's like, do there need to be so many villains that are unnecessary? And here is where I come to another point of what I think is one of the biggest issues, is that this series doesn't know what it wants to be. That's the thing. It starts off as this series about Rick Grimes and all these characters, but how they have become monsters, that they have become these monsters, and that's the story. This is it's like Breaking Bad. Again, I'll use Breaking Bad as an example, where Breaking Bad is basically how Walter White becomes from this teacher, law-abiding, kind of like this, no, he doesn't mess with nobody, he's just like quiet and timid and fearful, to this fearless criminal who's evil, mean, and brutal. It's like a complete transformation and to a down transformation. And that's what this starts off. Like, this is going to be about these guys who are good before the apocalypse, and now after the apocalypse, they're going to have to do these hard things. But as the series goes on, it just starts changing. It's trying to be a series about hope's gone and then like the hopes are back, but it doesn't start off like that. So it feels so disjointed that it just lost itself in the world. It feels like they were just writing the first 6 issues. Like, Robert Kirkman was just sitting there and he's like, let me just write the 6 issues. And it's like so big. They're like, oh my god, we gotta keep going. And again, that connects to the overly long. Like, I feel like instead of just having such a long thing, if they could have just took a punch of it, like Negan and the Commonwealth or like stuff like that, and put that together and did that, that would have been like 10 times better as a shorter story. And it doesn't know what it wants to be, like to the point where it's like, what do I like? What is this story about? Like, should I think like this or like this? And so you're just left unsure. Another thing is characters. I think some of these characters are good, like Tyrese. Tyrese is one of my favorite character in this entire series. Like, I love them for some reason. I don't know why. But the problem with all these other characters is there's so many of them killed so quickly, like that, to make you feel that this world is so dangerous that you don't ever connect with these characters because you expect them to die. Even the long-term characters, I was sad a little bit, but I still didn't feel that much because there's so many characters dying that you didn't feel that connected to them. And it just felt ridiculous at points because it was like, is Rick a hero or is he this? Another big problem is the constant spoon feeding us the messages of this. Like, there's so many moments, and more than 50 times, where they're like, am I a monster? Am I not a monster? I'm pretty much a monster. And then you don't even act like a monster, and then Rick Grimes is a hero, and then it's like, what is going on? Like, come on. Like, so much spoon feeding. Like, you don't have to tell us that you're discussing if you're monsters or not. You have to show us that is he a monster or not. And sure, I'm not saying you shouldn't talk about it, but it should be a couple of times, but not 50 times where he's like sitting with another character and he's like, am I a monster? I feel like I'm a monster. I pushed past the limits that I thought there could be. What I do? What do I do now? I feel so lost in this dark, dangerous world. It's like, calm the fuck down. Like, come on. Let's do this right. And I think the first compendium, I put them 1 through 4, never mind. Like, they're on the floor right now because I was like picking them up at the intro, and I'm doing this as I go, so I didn't think of this before. But the first compendium where there's a lot, I think, which is like about 50 issues, or the first 48, 49 issues, that is the strongest because that's where you can see that the creativity is there. Like, you're juicing it, but as it goes down, it goes downhill, and by the end, you're like, it's a sweet ending, but I don't feel like we've become there. Like I don't think we deserve that this type of ending. And yeah, well, that's what I think is wrong with the series is that it's so overly stretched that it loses itself in this. So should you read this? Yeah, I guess like I still read it because it's so popular, and I just feel like it was like something that could be achieved. Like, oh, yeah, I read this, but would I say this is like one of my favorites? No. Like, would I ever talk about it, like, and suggest it to people? No, because I feel like it had a good concept, but it lost itself and was way too long and didn't know where it was going. So I feel like if Robert Kirkman would have took much more while and set up like the shorter ending that would be like around like 75 issues or like even 50 issues, he would have been able to finish this story quicker and made it the right type of story where I could feel like, you know how in if you haven't seen Star Wars, but like in the third movie in the original trilogy, The Return of the Jedi, where from the start Darth Vader is this bad guy, but then for his love for his son changes him and he comes back to becoming good. It feels earned and it feels like it makes sense, you know, like yeah. And then when he dies, you feel bad emotion. That's because George Lucas did that in a brilliant way. But here, it's like it's not a big spoiler or anything, but like these characters are constantly like switching or like this or that or this, and by the end, like or for whatever happens in the series, you're like, really, like after this whole long journey, because I think this book, like this entire series is like 20 years of these characters' lives, and it's like really, like seriously, and it's like how much can I, and it's cool that the way they've done this like over 20 years of what happens to humanity and all that, but it's like it doesn't feel earned because there's so many ridiculous things happening that you're like no, no, no. And yeah, like it was just like something that was fine with me, but would I ever read it again? No. So anyways, that was my review for The Walking Dead. This is probably like my first negative review for anything. But yeah, I finished it. I'm proud that I finished it, and it's like one more thing checked off my bucket list. But yeah, so tell me down in the comments what do you guys think about The Walking Dead, and should I watch the show, or if the show is any good? And because I know John Bernthal was in this, and I love him in anything. So yeah, so please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Like and hit the subscribe button again. I'll say that again. But yeah, peace out.